So let's talk first about printers. And by the way, you don't need to write all this information down because it's on a handout that was available for you to copy or if you wish. And if you got that handout on the original newsletter that went out, there were 3 websites attached to that. I did not put those websites on there. I don't recommend them necessarily. And 2 of them I don't know anything about. If you got your handout from the reminder that went out just a couple of days ago, that those links are not on there. But anyway, I wanted to let you know you don't need to write this stuff down. You can talk about printers in 2 different ways: the way that the paper or medium feeds into the printer and the type of ink that that printer uses. Here are a couple of examples. The blue arrows are indicate the way that the paper feeds into the printer. The yellow arrow indicates the way that it comes out. So on the left here is an HP printer. The paper feeds in a front tray, does a U-turn and comes back out the front. And usually in this type of printer, the part that's being printed, the side that's being printed would be face down. That's something you need to always test before you go and print on fabric. Otherwise, you're going to waste some ink if you're on the paper side when you should have been on the fabric side. And trust me, I've done that. On the right is a different type of printer. It's the Epson printer. It has a more of a straight path where the paper feeds in from the back, from the rear tray, goes straight through the printer and out the front. For printing on fabric, this straight through feed is much better than having to do a U-turn. The other difference between these 2 printers is that the Epson printer uses pigment ink. The HP printer uses dye-based ink. And if you read any article about printing on fabric, 99% of them will tell you to use pigment-based ink. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Pigment-based ink is waterproof and it is more resistant to UV fading. And UV fading is a real problem with all fabrics, but especially with home printed fabric, inkjet printed fabric. In the middle of doing this, preparing for this program, this was my old Epson printer and I've used it for more than 10 years. It died. So I had to go and look into getting a new printer. Well, I was in for a big shock because printing has changed drastically in the last few years. Most people who buy an inkjet printer are more interested in how fast can it print and the cost, how cheap is it? So most inkjet printers now have gone to using dye-based ink, which is much cheaper than pigment-based ink. Epson still makes their Durabright Ultra pigment ink, but I don't know if they've changed the formula or what. I tried a new printer that uses it. It's one of their workforce printers, an all-in-one printer. It was rather expensive, I thought. It was almost $200. And what I was paying for was the fact that it does faxing and copying and all kinds of other stuff, which I don't really want. I just want it for printing on fabric. And the quality didn't seem quite the same to me. So I looked into some other printers. Epson now makes also dye-based inks in a lot of they've got different names. Claria is one of them. I forgot, they had eco tanks, which are cheap to fill. They're big tanks of ink, but they don't work very well on fabric. And so now I've been exploring the dye-based inks, and I'll show you what the difference is on real fabric in just a few minutes. So to print on fabric, there are a couple of ways you can go. Commercial ink fabric for inkjet printing, and I'm not going to go through all these brands. There are many different brands. The 2 brands that I have used that I like the best are these. The one on the left is made by Jacquard. It's cotton percale. And the one on the right is made by EQ Printables. They're cotton lawn. They have several different kinds of cotton for inkjet printing. What you should be interested in when you want to print on fabric is the thread count of the fabric, because the higher the thread count, the finer the weave, the better your print will be, the sharper it will be. And I think most of you are familiar with thread count, primarily in buying sheet sets. And it's interesting that thread count is defined as the number of threads per square inch of fabric. But when you go to buy sheets and you see two sets of sheets by two different manufacturers that are both about the same price, and one's marked 300 threads per inch and the other one is marked 600 threads per inch, most people are automatically going to think, wow, the 600 is the better buy because they're about the same price. Well, that's not necessarily true, because when you look at a single thread, just a piece of thread, it's not one strand. It's got several layers called plies. And I'll give you an example for quilting thread or cotton thread. The Mettler brand is 50 weight Mettler is 3-ply. That means there are 3 strands to it. But Aurifil, which is very popular, only has 2 strands for their 50 weight thread. So it makes a difference how many plies there are. And some sheet manufacturers will count plies per square inch and not threads per square inch.
Oh, wow.
So it's the higher, when you see that high thread count, is not necessarily a better deal. The other problem is that the thickness of the thread matters, and that's called denier, and the weave of the thread matters. You're all probably familiar with cotton sateen. It has that nice, smooth, almost glossy surface. It's got a different weave from cotton poplin. So the one on the right, the EQ Printables, actually has a higher thread count. It's 240 threads per square inch. Whereas the Inkjet or the Jacquard only has about 200 to 220. But I prefer the Jacquard because of the color. The EQ Printables has a slightly cream color, and that's going to change the colors of your print that you're trying to do. So just to give you a reference point on the thread count of these fabrics, regular quilting cotton is about 68 thread counts per inch. So you can see it's much coarser than these. These are much finer. Other fabrics that you can print on are silk, linen, organza, both the silk organza and the nylon organza, Lutrador, which is a non-woven synthetic material that's translucent. It's not completely clear, but you can see through it. Tissue, ordinary old dime store tissue paper. Use dryer sheets. Cork, thin layers of cork. Thin leather. And also thin metal if you prepare a special coating, you put a special coating on it. I tried thin vinyl, but the ink does not like vinyl because vinyl's plastic, the ink just won't stick to it. This is commercial on the left. Jacquard makes what they call extravaganza, which is a very good product. I've used that. And on the right is silk. There's silk, and I've used that quite a bit. Here's an example of some prints I've done on silk. Several years ago, Teddy Pruitt did a program at the Guild, and she was a program on making memory quilts. And so I decided to make one to honor my grandmother. And I had a lot of pictures, old pictures, and that I decided to print on silk because silk is so finely woven. It shows all the detail. And on the right here is an enlargement of a picture when my grandmother was 1 year old. Don't you just love her bonnet? And that picture is 127 years old. So I was happy to be able to print it on fabric. On the back of this quilt, I printed also on silk a partial family tree, where the oldest relative I could find of hers was born in 1753 in England. And so that's another neat thing you can do. Here's a picture of Luchador. You can buy Luchador. Joann's used to sell it. I don't know if they still do or not. But you can see it almost looks like a dryer sheet, but it's stiffer than a dryer sheet. There's several different weights. This is the medium weight and easily goes through the printer. Here's an example of printing on Luchador where I ran this through the printer. The other thing about Luchador is that you can use heat to distress it or make holes in it. And I did that here to make it look like a leaf. Here's another example of Luchador where I used the Luchador for the moon, which gives just the right kind of texture, that bubbly texture to that moon. Here's an example of printing on ordinary tissue paper. This is just part of a wall hanging where different leaves are shown on different squares or rectangles. And for the backing on these, I printed out words that describe those particular trees and then just used it as a backing. So it was kind of interesting. It printed quite nicely on just ordinary old tissue paper. I did have to make sure it was nice and smooth, not wrinkled up. The background on this quilt is done on used dryer sheets. I took the used dryer sheets and I started painting them, but that was too much of a nuisance and it was messy. So I just ran them through the printer and changed the color in my photo software. This is printing on organza. And on the right hand, you can see how sheer this organza is. You can see there are several layers here. When you print on something this sheer, you're going to lose a lot of ink because it goes right through the material is so sheer. So what I started doing, I finally got smart after wasting ink. And what I now do is I place the sheer organza layer on top of a layer of fabric. And I tape them together and then I pass it through the printer so that I get the top layer here, the organza, and then this over here is the fabric layer that was beneath it. So I get two prints for the price of one run through the printer. You can also print on cork. This is a layer of natural cork. I've only tried the black ink. I haven't tried the colors. I think I plan to try it sometime, but you have to be careful. You're going to lose a lot of the color just because of the natural color of your background, which is the cork here. But this did quite well just with regular printing. Okay, suppose you want to prepare your own fabric instead of buying the commercial fabric, because it depends on how much printing you're going to do. It can get expensive. What you want to look for is a PFD fabric that's prepared for dyeing. And the higher the thread count, the better. A lot of people, probably the most popular or well-known PFD fabric is Kona cotton. Well, I don't like Kona cotton. Kona cotton is a very coarse weave. Remember that regular quilting cotton is about 68 threads per inch. Kona PFD is only 60, so it's quite coarse compared to those jacquard fabrics. However, you can get the same fabric that Hoffman uses for their batiks, and its thread count is around 200 threads per inch. And I bought it before at equilter.com. Another company that has high thread count PFD fabric is called Test.com. Test.com has great fabric for printing on. it's a little awkward to work with them. It's not like a usual website where you get pictures and good descriptions. And I think on your reference sheet, I listed the 2 fabrics that are most used from that company. All right, once you've got your PFD fabric, you have to treat it some way so it will accept the ink. And there's a product called Bubble Jet Set. It's a liquid. You put it in, pour it into a tray, put your fabric in, soak it for about 5 minutes. Take it out of that solution. Don't rinse it or don't wring it. Just let it drip dry or flat dry, iron it, and then it's ready for the printer. Now, the Bubble Jet Set company claims that if you must use their special product called Bubble Jet Rinse to make your printed image more resistant to fading. I have never used Bubble Jet Rinse, but I have to say that 99% of the things I print, I do not wash. So if you wanted to wash your product, you might want to look into that. Here's a picture of Bubble Jet Set, and it lasts a long time. You can reuse it after you put your fabric in, and you just pour it back in the bottle and keep it for next time. You can see, those of you who have been around Gainesville for a while, see that I bought this Bubble Jet Set from my favorite quilt shop. I don't remember how long ago that closed, so I've had it for quite a while, but I do use it occasionally. I want to pause here for a minute and see if anybody has any questions. Does anyone have any questions so far?
Not yet.
Okay.
I do, Gretchen. It's Nancy Roberts.
Hi.
I'm just wondering, when you said that you sometimes apply the tissue paper to fabric and run it through, do you use any stiffener, or do you tape it to a sheet of copy paper or anything that helps you get it through?
I'm going to show you that in just a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. By the way, I went to the Bubble Jet site website, and they now have a different, they have this Bubble Jet Set, but they have a separate Bubble Jet Set solution for Epson printers and a different one for HP printers. So I emailed the company and I asked them, I have both types of printers. Is it really necessary for me to have 2 different bottles of Bubble Jet Set? And you know what they said, of course. Well, of course you need to buy these separate ones because each company has a different ink formula. I'm not so sure that that's true. I really not. I use the same one on both printers, and it seems to be fine. And I'll show you in a minute.
Gretchen, this is Judy. I have a question. You know that like at Joann's, where you can buy a packet of paper packet of fabric on paper already cut, sheet size. Is that too coarse? It doesn't seem like it's a very fine fabric at all.
Do you know what brand it is?
I have a couple of them. One's in blue and one is in an orange wrapper. I don't know. I would pull them out.
I really don't know. There are dozens of brands of fabric for inkjet printing, and some are good and some are not. The only 2 I use on a regular basis are the 2 that I've just talked about. Okay, if you go on the internet, there are formulas to make your own Bubble Jet Set by using soda ash and alum dissolved in hot water, and then soak the fabric, et cetera, et cetera. The comments that I saw on the success of this, I have not tried it, but the comments I saw on the success said that it worked for black ink, but not for colored ink. Well, there's a reason for that, because now almost all printing companies, or printer manufacturers, are using pigment-based black ink, even if their color ink is dye-based ink. So you don't need Bubble Jet Set for black ink. It does not wash out. It's pigment ink. So I don't know the value of making your own homemade formula, but you can give it a try. Okay, I did some experiments with 3 different things going on in this experiment. 2 different printers, that means pigment ink versus dye-based ink. Commercial, different kinds of fabric. Each row has a different kind of fabric all the way across. The top row is the jacquard, pre-treated fabric. The second row is the batik PFD. Third row is another company that does inkjet fabrics, which I pretty much used it up, so I didn't talk about it, but they have good quality fabrics. The bottom row is good old muslin from Joann's. Now, as you know, there are many different kinds of muslin and different prices. I bought the most expensive one. It seemed to be the finest weave to me, and that's the one I used. But if you look at this page on the left is, well, I already mentioned that, is the pigment ink. On the right, we have the dye-based ink. And then each page is divided into 2 halves, vertical halves. The right vertical half in every case is treated with bubble jet set. Yes, I even put the pre-treated commercial fabric in bubble jet set. And look, it makes a difference. The print you get is slightly brighter, sharper. So it does make a difference. Comparing the 2 inks, on the right-hand side, this is dye-based ink and it's sharper. The colors are more vibrant, and that is the one big advantage or pro of dye-based inks over pigment inks. However, dye-based inks are supposed to be more susceptible to ultraviolet fading. So there are ways to deal with that. The next slide shows you exactly why you need to use treated fabric or treat your own. Bingo. These were put in cold water and then dried. No detergent. But look what happened on the right-hand side with the dye-based ink. An untreated fabric. This was the batik PFD, and this was the muslin. The minute it touched water, all that color was gone, completely gone. But you see that the black ink stayed, and that's because the black is the pigment-based ink. Even over here with the muslin, the colors are fine after putting them through. So bubble jet set really works. It will here. This is the dye-based ink, but this side was treated with bubble jet set, and so you see the colors there. It's now been made waterproof. The fading is another problem. I don't have, these are 2 examples of products that I've printed that are about 9 and 10 years old. On the left, some of you might remember a quilt show that we participated in with the Museum of Natural History called Quilting Natural Florida. And this was actually Quilting Natural Florida 2, and that was in 2010. And the left, this is a pocket on a tote bag I made. The left half of this is a picture of the quilt I entered into that exhibit, and it's greatly faded, as you can see, but that's very faded, and that was pigment-based ink. So but I carried this tote bag everywhere for years. In fact, I still use it occasionally. It's pretty threadbare, but I still love it and I use it. The quilt on the right, just part of a quilt, was I made with someone else for a woman asked me to help her give her mother a 80th birthday quilt that had pictures of all her family members and friends on it. And so I agreed to do it. And I got pictures from all over the country, some of them by snail mail and just actual photographs, and some by email. And some of them were not in good condition. They didn't have a good resolution. To make them all blend together, I turned them all into sepia color in my software. But this has been great. This is about 9 years old, and it has greatly faded. This is a picture I took just a couple of weeks ago, and it has greatly faded. I wish I had a picture of the original, but I don't, and she didn't either. She had the quilt. She said she didn't need a picture. So, so what can you do about this fading? Well, I've discovered two good products. They're sprays that you can put on after everything's printed and quilted and you're finished with it. And these are UV archival varnishes. Now, I've talked to both of these companies, and no company has any experience with using this on fabric, and they won't guarantee anything. But these sprays are used by fine artists who do watercolors or acrylics or want to preserve, because those paintings are also subjected to UV fading. And so I have talked extensively and read a lot of reviews of these products, and I have used both of them. They're spray varnishes, and that sounds scary because you think of varnish as being tacky, shiny, whatever, but they're not. And the trick to using them is and you have to do it outside because they really stink because they're not water-based solvents. They're solving the problem of water solubility. They're making the product waterproof and UV protected. So just two very light sprayings, and it does not change the hand of the fabric at all. And so far, I haven't used them very long, but so far I really like them, and I'm going to continue to use them. There are a couple of well-known quilters, like the one that comes to mind is Carol Breyer Fallert Gentry. She's got another name added onto the end of her long names. Uses this on all her wall hangings, which travel all over the world all the time. So this is going to be my solution to using. I'm currently now going to be using, I have a new printer. It's a Canon printer. It uses dye-based ink. The prints are really sharp. The colors are vibrant. And I'm going to spray using this ultraviolet spray to help prevent the fading over time. But I don't have any long-term results to show you. I've got an experiment sitting in near a window, not in direct sun, but in bright light. And after a couple of months, I'm going to compare the unsprayed one to the sprayed one. So we'll see what happens. Okay, now, if you want to print on your own fabric or some of these other materials, you need to have a support to get it through the printer. A lot of people use freezer paper. You can get two different kinds of freezer paper, just the regular, and then there's a company called C. Jenkins. C. Jenkins, by the way, also makes the bubble jet set. C. Jenkins makes a thicker 8.5 by 11 freezer paper that's a little bit thicker, sometimes called quilter's freezer paper. I don't like it particularly because it's less sticky. It doesn't stick to the fabric quite as well when you iron it on, I think, as regular freezer paper. But I don't like freezer paper anyway, because you can get some jams in your printer. What I use is a sheet of Mylar or quilter's, what do you call it? Not stencil, but you can use it for stencil, but what are they? Template plastic, that's what it's called. If you want to make shapes and so forth, and you have a permanent shape that's not going to fall apart. And it comes in different thicknesses. It's hard to find the right thickness. I prefer somewhere in the range of 7 to 10 mils, which is about 1 mil is 1/1000th of an inch. I have a little video to show you how I do this. It comes in opaque and it comes in clear. It doesn't really matter for this purpose whether it's opaque or clear. And what does matter is the flexibility of it. And here's a little video to show you how I do this. I take the piece of Mylar, and it looks grubby because I've used you saw that family quilt I made. I used the same piece of Mylar for about 100 trips through the printer. So that's another advantage of using the Mylar. You can use it over and over and over and over again. What I do is take, this is cut to exactly 8.5 by 11 to fit through your printer. Or if you have a large format printer, you can get it in bigger sizes. And I cut my fabric just a little smaller so that you want to be sure not to have any fabric over the edge of this. So let's play this little video here. Make sure it's flexible. This is a 7 mil piece, and it's flexible enough it'll go through the printer. I take my piece of fabric and get it lined up so it's just inside the edges of that Mylar. And then I tape especially the leading edge, the edge that's going to go through the printer first. I use ordinary Scotch tape. And let me pause here 1 second. I don't know if you can see it, but right up here, there's an edge of that tape sticking out. You don't want that to happen, so I'd have to go back and cut that off. You want to make sure there's nothing over the edge of the Mylar. Some people use, what's the painter's tape, what looks like masking tape. That's a little bit thicker, and I've had good success with, I like the Scotch tape, so that's just what I use. Then, to make sure that nothing's going to move, I lift up the fabric and I do a few spritzes of 505 adhesive spray, temporary adhesive. You can use the other brand. That's the brand I have, and smooth it down. This guarantees that that fabric is not going to move off that sheet, and it'll run right through the printer. And I've not had a problem. If I were going to be printing on organza, I would tape all 4 sides because organza is too airy-fairy and fluffy. So that nails it down. Does that answer your question, Nancy? Okay. Anybody else have any questions at this point? Okay. Now, what if you want to do, the advantage of printing on your own fabric is you could do some special stuff. You can use photo manipulation in different photo software. I use Photoshop Elements. GIMP is a free software program, very much like Photoshop Elements. iPad has a huge number of apps for doing funky things with your photos and then printing them. And like turning people into cartoons and whatnot. And I'm sure for kids that would be great. Digital grounds. Digital grounds are media that you can put on your fabric to give special effects. They're mostly made for photographers to give special effects for their photos. Most of them don't work very well on fabric because they're different kinds. Glossy, semi-glossy, but that you lose all of that on fabric. There used to be the Golden Company that makes paints and textile media used to make digital grounds. They have discontinued that, but there is another company that I'll talk about that does make them. Word clouds, software that generates word clouds are real fun to use. I do those. And you can actually use printing on fabric to help if you do any thread painting. So let's take a look at some of these. This was, I posterized a piece of, or a picture of me and printed it on our Fiber Art Bee did a series of journal quilts. And the theme changed every month, and this was called Selfie. And so I just posterized a picture of me and did it on here. And I also have little pictures of some of my quilts. Here's another journal quilt from the Fiber Art Bee. The background is a code that was supposedly used, a computer as you can see, digital code that was supposedly used by the Unabomber. And the theme for this one was secrets. And so I don't know if you can see in here, but this is a working zipper on these pair of lips that I printed. And inside it says classified. Inkaid is the company that makes digital grounds. They don't call it digital grounds, but that's what they are. And they have, oh gosh, I don't know, 16 or more different kinds. The one on the left, white matte, is the best for giving you the sharpest prints. It would give you a print on fabric, if you painted your fabric with it, a print just like a photographic print, but it changes the hand of your fabric and makes it really stiff, almost like paper. The middle one is part of one of their series of iridescent, and I like to use some of these. It gives a special iridescence to the fabric. It does change the hand of the fabric. The one on the right is used for non-porous materials like the thin metal I mentioned before. I have not tried that, but you supposedly can coat non-porous materials with it and then print on it. It's thin enough to go through your printer. Here's an example of the bronze iridescent that I painted onto this fabric before it was printed. And then this print also has double layer print, which is done in Photoshop.
Gretchen,
Yes.
back one slide where you talked about the stuff that would work on metal. Do you
Yes.
think that would have made your vinyl work?
Maybe. I did not try that one on the vinyl, or did I? I'll have to go back and look at my sheet. I did try one on the vinyl. And in fact, actually, Peggy, I did try this on the vinyl, and no, it didn't work. It peeled off the vinyl. It wouldn't stick to the vinyl was the problem. But there are different kinds of vinyls. It may work on another kind. Okay, word clouds. I love word clouds. And when some of you may remember Bev Hilton, who was part of our fiber art. In fact, she and I started the fiber art bee. When she was very sick, we all, many of us made prayer flags for her. And I took a quote from Helen Keller and put it into a heart shape. There are several different word cloud companies. The one I use is, I think, just called wordclouds.com. The piece on the right over here was also a fiber art bee journal quilt. The theme was coffee. So I took all the names I could think of coffee and put them into the shape of a coffee cup and printed it on fabric. The middle one is not fabric, but I was on part of the committee on an art quilt retreat. And one of my jobs is to make name tags. Instead of making boring old name tag, I decided to use a word cloud and print it on for hair on this. So I have a lot of fun with word clouds. Okay, now how can you use printing on fabric for thread painting? First of all, what I define as thread painting is not this. This is what I call thread sketching or thread embellishing, where you stitch on parts of your, this is a part of a collage, to give it more depth or more texture. But real thread painting is what someone like Nancy Prince does, where the entire surface is solid thread. I have done very little of that. Once and once only, because I found it really tedious to do. But here's my real thread painted piece. It's rather small. I don't ever want to do a bigger one. So what I did was print the picture of the cat on fabric and then thread paint it over it. And the advantage of doing that is when you thread paint something, it is very hard to cover a surface solidly with thread. So this way, if you've got the picture behind there and you miss one or two lines, you won't be able to tell because the color is the correct color. It's just on fabric behind it. Suppose you want to print something that's bigger than your printer will print. Most people just have the regular size printer, 8.5 by 11. Well, you can actually print on your own printer a much larger picture by tiling your photos. And there are a couple of different websites that do this. It's for free. You can do it in Microsoft Excel, but you're limited there. You don't have as many options as with doing going to one of these commercial companies. The one I prefer is called Rasterbator, and yes, it does rhyme with a word you all know. And in fact, they even say that on their website. They claim that they were non-English speaking when they set up the company, and they didn't know. Well, who knows if that's true or not. Anyway, what they do is you upload your image, and you tell it how big you want to make your quilt, and it tells you how many sheets you're going to need. It prints references, it prints cropping areas, and then you just put them together. I'll show you an example of that. On this quilt, the slice of lime up here at the top is, I don't remember exactly how wide it is, but it's something like 18 inches wide maybe. So I couldn't print it all in one go. So I used two sheets of fabric to print that image on, and they joined together perfectly. So you can't tell. Same over here on the right with kiwi seeds. That's very long, and I couldn't do it all in one go. There's another example. I belong to this round robin group with the art quilters in Jacksonville, where you get a piece of fabric and then you have to do something to it. Well, this is the piece of fabric I got, which was, I thought, a bizarre piece of fabric to submit to a round robin, but that's what I got. So here's what I did to it. I cut up all the pumpkins and I printed a haunted house or shed. And this is about 20 inches wide across here. And I did it by using the tiling, the Rasterbator. It actually took me 3 or 4 sheets of paper to do this, fabric to do this. But you can't tell where it was. You have to choose your print just right, because sometimes you could tell. Suppose you want to print even bigger than that. Well, there are commercial companies called print-on-demand companies. There are quite a few of them. The only one I have ever used is Spoonflower, and I know some of you have used it too. There's actually a review of all these companies in the January Sakwa Journal issue this year. So if you want to look up some of the others, if you can get a hold of that publication. The advantage of using these is you can print much bigger, and all of them have, I think all of them, I know Spoonflower does, is this cute little sample box. And I strongly recommend that if you want to print use their company, that you buy this box. It's only a few dollars. It has every single piece of fabric that they print on and all their colors. They have about 3 or 4 or 5 different kinds of cotton. I've used a couple of different ones. They have, I've used the linen cotton canvas, with almost like a linen material, a heavy linen. They even have, gauze, and they even print on minky, which is pretty cool. So I strongly recommend that. Then you know what the fabric is going to be like before you order your print, to buy this box. I didn't the first time I ordered something, and I didn't choose the right fabric. It was a cotton, but it was too coarse a weave. I didn't like it at all. And if I'd bought the box ahead of time, I would have known. The other thing, when you print with one of these companies, you upload your image and you can do some cool things with it. The image here on the left is a piece of fabric that I ice dyed, and I love the pattern so much that I had a yard of it printed, because when you ice dye, you can never get the same thing again. You can never do the same thing twice. So I had Spoonflower print a whole yard of it, and I've used pieces of it. But while I had it there, you can increase or double or triple or quadruple your pattern here. What do they call it? Repeats. And you can do a straight repeat, you can do a staggered repeat. So I did that just for fun. And I don't know how many times I repeated this, but here's the fabric, the piece that turned out from repeating it. And you can either have your fabrics or your images be private, or you can be public, so that somebody could purchase fabric based on your image, and you get a small royalty when they do that. I actually had 2 people buy this, this particular repeated fabric. I didn't buy it. I don't know what I'd do with it, but it was fun to do, and 2 people actually bought it. Here's another one I had printed by Spoonflower. A friend sent me this image of a sunset, and I loved it so much. I had it printed in yardage, and I used parts of it in several different quilts. You notice that Spoonflower has put my name with copyright all over this, so somebody can't just take your image and copy it and use it. It's got your name plastered all over it. Here's a fun project I did with Spoonflower one year for Christmas gifts, and I took images of some of our flowering trees, or our nice trees. This is our Japanese red maple, and had it printed on their linen cotton canvas with a border. You can choose the color of your border and how wide it is, and turned it into a kitchen towel. And their fabric is expensive. I don't remember exactly now, but this fabric was probably $23, $24 a yard. But I got 4 kitchen towels out of 1 yard. And so I thought that was a pretty neat thing to do. And of course, it was a neat gift. But here's an even neater gift, a neater project. And Spoonflower has a tutorial for doing this. I took some of my recipes that my kids love and wrote them out by hand, and then scanned the image into my computer, uploaded it to Spoonflower, and had it printed on that cotton linen canvas material to use as a kitchen towel. I also uploaded with it these images, in this case of chili peppers, and so forth. So my kids just love that, and I did a bunch of those. Okay, where would you get your images from? Your own photos, to use the highest resolution possible. What's important here is, if you want to get internet images, is that they be copyright free. There's several different websites where you can get these images: pixabay.com, pexels.com, and there are a few other sites. If you see an image you love and it's not copyright free, write to the artist, photographer, painter, whoever it is, ask if you permission to use it in a quilt. I've done this several times, and the permission is usually granted. I wasn't turned down. One person never replied, so I didn't use the image. In one case, they asked me to buy the image, and it wasn't like $20 to use it. But most of them have just said, sure, go ahead. Send me a picture of what you do with it. And if you want to do something that's just for personal use, then you don't have to worry so much about the copyright. If you want to exhibit or sell it or put it on a quilt that you might exhibit, you really have to pay attention to the copyright. Here's an example of the fun things I did for my kids. I made those little travel little duffel bags that Laura Jones showed us how to do a couple of years ago. But instead of, they're neat with regular fabrics, but they're even neater to a person if you put pictures that are meaningful to them on it. For my daughter, her favorite band is a band called Rush, which I don't like, but that's her favorite. So I used prints of all their album covers on this little bag. For my son, I used sports team logos. And I'm not worried about the copyright. And these are one-time personal use. I'm not gonna, I wouldn't print something on a jacket or something, print a Disney image on a jacket and go to Disney World. I wouldn't do that because Cindy Townsend had an episode of the Disney police are out. Hers was a legitimate embroidery image, I believe, but she did, or I think one of her daughters had it on at Disney World and they were stopped and asked about it. So, okay, in summary, use pre-treated fabric, either commercial or your own. Use a high resolution image. It's a good idea to increase your color saturation up to about 20% because what you see on a computer screen is sharp and clear and bright and vibrant. It won't look that way on fabric. It won't look the same way it does in a magazine or on a high quality photo. Fabric has got the dull background, the dull surface. So increase your color saturation up a little bit. Feed your sheets in one at a time. Don't stack them because the fabric will stick to the next sheet and you'll get some terrible jams. As far as print settings go, I use plain paper setting. Mine doesn't have too many other settings. I use normal speed. I use normal print. You can try high quality if you want, but if you use high quality, sometimes it puts too much ink on the fabric and it makes your print a little bit blurry. Let your print dry for several hours or even overnight. I usually do it overnight and then press it with a dry iron. And then now I've added my last step is to spray it with UV protectant spray. That's using most for the dye-based inks. So I hope you have some fun with printing on fabric. Does anybody have any other questions?